the first shot was the Apollo 11 Earthrise, and that the still picture was the Apollo 8 Earthrise.
It must have lent itself to some grand thoughts when you saw that the Earth rising above the horizon of the moon.
Well, what struck me, I mean, I think we were all, taken aback because there had been no planning, discussion of seeing the Earth. We were trained to a degree to explore the moon, to comment on the topography and geology, if you will, of the moon. And when I saw the Earthrise and then also pictures of the small Earth from a lunar distance, it crossed my mind that, here we'd spent all this time studying the moon, and what we were doing was discovering the Earth.
Wow. Tagging on to that then, taking it to the next step. Which one of you, or did you do this together, decided to read from Genesis?
Well, the Genesis reading, about 6 weeks before the flight, I got a call from Julian Scher, who was the head of PI for NASA, and his widow is here today somewhere. I saw her. There she is right there. And if you can imagine this, Julian said, hey, Frank, you're going to have the largest TV audience that's ever listened to a man on that broadcast from the moon on Christmas Eve. I said, gee, that's nice, Julian. What should we do? He said, anything that's appropriate. Right there, that was the essence of this country. If we'd have been Soviets, we'd have been talking about Lenin or this or that. And I got the instructions to tell the crew, just do what's appropriate. And so frankly, I think we were all really busy with the flight plan. That was the last thing on my mind. I don't know about you guys, but I contacted a friend of mine, Cy Borgen, and about 2 weeks before the flight, he came back with the idea of maybe reading from Genesis, and we all liked it, and that's how it happened. Almost ad hoc, but so appropriate.
Well, just as one of the ones that was back here watching, may I tell you that was one of the most moving experiences of the entire NASA program, and that is saying a lot. That's a considerable thing to say.
Let me explain a little bit more of what Frank was talking about, because Cy Borgen was trying to think up something to say that was appropriate, which was Genesis, of course, but he went to a newspaper man, Joe Layton, and said, look, if you write articles all the time, write prose, what would be appropriate for the Apollo 8 crew to say? And so Joe Layton spent up most of the night trying to figure out what would be appropriate around the moon on Christmas Eve to say to millions of people all around the Earth. And finally, his wife came down, and she said, what are you doing? And he told her what his project was. And she said, well, it's natural. Read the first 10 verses of Genesis, which is the foundation of most of the world's religions, not just the Christian religion, but most of the people who will be listening to you are probably not Christian. And that's how it finally came to pass.
Well, she should get a plaque somewhere on this.
I think she should.
And thank heaven she didn't say, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. What a great and
somebody else said that, though.
Yes. That's true. To take it back to a moment none of us likes to remember, that is, what was it, January of '67, a training mission with your fellow astronauts ended in disaster. Did the press coverage, as you recall, change after, let me ask you this, Bill, did it seem to change after Apollo 1?
I frankly don't know. Maybe these other guys do, but it's my recollection that the scrutiny of NASA from Congress and others certainly increased. And frankly, I think if they hadn't assigned Frank the job of rooting out and then saying without any frosting on it just what happened, we wouldn't have gone when we did. And the spacecraft they re-engineered almost from the bottom up wouldn't have been anywhere near as good as it was. So maybe Frank would be the guy to
talk to me about that investigation.
Well, Bill is awfully kind, but the genius behind the Apollo 8 mission, as well as the re-engineered Apollo, was a man by the name of George Low, who unfortunately passed away with a brain tumor, I think, didn't he?
Melanoma.
Melanoma. But he changed the whole management concept, and he became much more disciplined. You couldn't get any change in the spacecraft unless he approved it. And the difference between the Block 1 spacecraft, which is the one that burned, and the Block 2 spacecraft, which is the one that flew successfully, but there wasn't a problem in any of the missions with the command module ever. So it was a tribute to George Low and the people that he put together that made that work.
Actually, one of my big disappointments on our flight was I was the sort of the command module systems engineer, and I was just hoping for one of the multi emergencies that they gave us in the simulator that I was so skillful at solving. But Frank made this thing so good that I didn't have anything to do but hang on and take a picture.
You didn't get to show off. Huh?
We didn't have a lunar module. It was a lunar module pilot.
Well, it is amazing, though. I think I read somewhere that there were so many different systems and parts in the Saturn-Apollo combination that if you had a 99.99% success ratio on all of them, you'd still have, what was it, 5,000 failures. To the best of my knowledge, we didn't have any significant failure.
And this was in the analog days where they didn't have digital chips.
Yeah.
I think, you know, probably one of these watches today you wear had bigger capacity than the Apollo computer.
That's right. That's right.
You know, I really need to take our viewers back, for those who are very young particularly, take them back to that time, to 1968. I always called, I was doing news even then, and I always called it the year the United States had its nervous breakdown. Nothing seemed to go well in 1968. Everything terrible that could happen did happen. Martin Luther King, Jr., Robert Kennedy, the Democratic National, everything that could mess up seemed to mess up. And however, at the end of the year, you three and all of those who worked with you and supported you made it all come right. Out of all those things that happened that year, you were the Time magazine People of the Year. Did you have any sense of how important you were to us at that troubled time? Let me ask you, Jim.
At the time that we were doing the mission, at least for me, I was so involved in trying to do a good job and getting back safely that I didn't realize the importance of it until after we got back home again. And then I looked back at what had happened all during 1968 and the fact we were successful. And I thought that this is really our highest moment right here. And we ended the year on an upbeat.
Boy, did you ever. And could we ever use it? And we really needed it. I know this audience is too young to remember. Well, maybe not all of you. But
at least the stock market was stable.
Now, excuse me, stock market? What's that?
Down there.
Yes, that's right. I think we're entering the post-stock market era, aren't we? At that point, did that help, or what was the relationship of NASA, and particularly the face of NASA, you, with the press at that time? Let me ask you, Frank.
Well, I think by and large it was very favorable. It was hard to get bad press after Apollo 8. After the fire, it was hard to get good press.
Gotcha.
So it's just like the media always is. It goes up and down. And when you got a weak sister, they pile on. Mm-hmm. When you have a success, they pile on.
Who was the darling of the press? Who was the one that they always looked to?
After the flight, Jim Lovell and I had to get back to work. But Frank flitted all around the globe.
He was our spokesman.
I see. Yes, I see. Okay. Well, so you were the darling of the press, huh?
No, I wasn't
Yes.
the darling of the press. I thought you meant who was the. I guess Walter Cronkite was kind of the.
I thought it was one of the press people. I thought he was the.
Of the press. Yeah.
Yes.
Probably the most knowledgeable was Jules Bergman. He knew it backwards and forwards.
Everybody knows Walter Cronkite. Maybe not as many people will remember Jules Bergman, but he was very smart.
Too, yeah.
He was a smart fellow. I spoke to Walter 4 days ago. Told him I was going to be talking to you. He said to say hello.
He's still alive. Huh?
Yes, he said the same about you, Frank.
Well, I talked a moment ago on the telephone to Cy Borgen, and I said, "Cy, how can you still be alive?"